Greetings, you accursed. David Herle here with your ever-loving political panel. 3 strategy and comms gurus that no other political show can match, even though they try as they might by stealing 2/3 of them. Kory Teneycke, Scott Reid, Jordan Leichnitz are here. We'll go right to the rundown today because this episode's going to be a banger. I know it. We're talking about a financial fight. The feds versus the doctors on the capital gains tax. Is that the fight they wanted? We're talking about what Trudeau's recent podcast appearances say about the Liberals' next ballot question. That's our cursed clipping from Stephanie Taylor at the Canadian Press. And then we're talking about growing speculation about a change in the Liberal leadership. And finally, Mr. Pinsent's talking about the 4 of us canning all that and getting to our hey yous. Jordan, Kory, Scott. You know, Jordan and Kory, it's Scott's birthday tomorrow.
Oh, happy birthday.
Wow, happy birthday.
It's never happy when you are skating toward the thin ice of 60. So,
Well, I'm turning 50 in a few months, so there you go.
we'll make that a banger. That'll be a
That's
right.
Special
Well,
episode.
you're all
Do
invited.
we have
You're all
I know,
invited.
but do we have to fly to Dubai? Like, what do you like? I know your tastes.
I'm just having a party at our condo. Just having a party at the condo. That's it. Yeah.
Right?
Put
All
the
right,
Dom
and maybe-
Perignon
and-
layaway, Scott.
And an echo version in Saskatchewan of the farm. There's a Teneycke family reunion coming, so there'll probably be a cake in there somewhere.
Right.
My dad's
Just a little-
turning 75 as well, so it's a big year. Big year.
Oh, wow. That's cool. Just a little hint for you there, Kory. That lemon heart rum that you got me for Christmas is long gone.
I think I got another bottle here with me, actually.
I have some visitors coming from Manitoba on Wednesday, and I'm going to be getting restocked.
Oh, boy.
Oh, very good.
Excellent. All right. So listen, kids. The capital gains tax change in the budget was supposed to be controversial. The government wanted the richest elements of society and the Conservative Party to oppose the measure. That way, voters could know whose corner, who was in. The only people who've really stepped up to the fight are Canada's doctors, many of whom have incorporated as a retirement savings vehicle. Despite being wealthier than average, doctors are popular people and difficult to demonize for their wealth. They're seen to deserve it. Add to that a doctor shortage, and this may not be the fight the government wanted. Scott.
Yes. I agree. I was abrupt. Sorry. I apologize. I was just finishing up Masters of the Air. I agree. I'm not as sympathetic as lots of people. Like, I actually find the pages of the ROB being stuffed with people saying what a villainous and ruinous measure this is and how it's surely going to condemn Canada to third world status. It kind of drives me up the wall. And leaving the doctor side for 1 second, like, I particularly like, the venture capital and big business voices, like, they drive me up the wall. It's like, hey, fuck, guys. Like, all you do is go from one conference to another bitching about the lack of productivity. You could actually fucking reinvest in your businesses. You could actually put some money towards machinery and innovation and R&D, right? And it just drives me nuts. Like, it's always give me every single thing and don't do a damn thing that I don't like. Otherwise, you're condemning Canada. The hubris of the business community and its capacity to speak on behalf of the entire country, so their interest and their ability to reap quarterly fucking numbers and annual fucking bonuses, that is co-equivalent with the national interest, drives me up the wall. But that being said, it's not what your question was about. What your question was about doctors. So I know this. I'm not as sympathetic as most people to this. I think that the characterization of the impact is exaggerated and a bit breathless. But this is not the fight that the government wanted. They wanted to tempt Poilievre into a fight. They wanted the big business community that I was just condemning to make a bunch of noise. They wanted the Conservatives to feel pressure. They wanted to get them onto the battlefield. They didn't get any of that. They just got the business guys bitching and moaning on the pages of the ROB editorials. And now they've got the doctors. I don't think this thing is going to run for a lot longer. I think you're going to see some complaints. I'm sure if you're in Ottawa, you're dealing with it as officials and staffers, but I question the ability of this to really have a long-term potent effect. But I kind of think we're almost on the last chapter of this budget in terms of its at least popular salience as a matter of public discussion and political discussion. And this last chapter is about this, and it's about the doctors, and it's not the fight they wanted. I don't think it's going to massively undermine them, but as a government, but it's not the fight they wanted. They didn't get the fight they wanted. Now they're left sort of dealing with, this bit of cleanup on aisle 4, and it's it's unpleasant. The last thing I will say is, notwithstanding everything I just said, maybe I'm completely wrong, because I'm astonished at the number of media hits that I've done the last week or so, where people have gotten really angry, like anchors that I'm dealing with go, "What are you talking about? This measure is awful." And I don't know if it's just like they're all anchors happen to be general practitioners or they own lots of cottages, but maybe it's bubbling at a level that I don't see. But I just think the fundamental takeaway is they didn't get the fight they wanted, and they got a fight that they would just as soon not have. But they'll punch through it.
So, Jordan, what's your gut tell you? So they've got this conflict, and I see Mark Holland having to respond to it, and I see the Prime Minister having to respond to it, and I see the head of the Canadian Medical Association up there. There's lots of, given that problems with getting a family practitioner in Canada, there's lots of sympathy for that point of view. So I'm just wondering, is the overall takeaway that a person would have from this is that even though you're sympathetic toward doctors, that wealthier people are going to be hurt by this and not wealthier people are not going to be hurt by this? Or does the fact that it's doctors completely blunt that others versus you contrast that the government was looking for?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's either, to be honest with you. And I think that we've seen a smattering of polling since the budget that suggests that reviews on the tax measure and the capital gains in general are mixed, right? And I think that what that research is really showing is that a lot of it depends on how it's framed, and also that most Canadians are just not following the minutia of this budget. And I think that is probably the baseline takeaway from this, that most people are not following the blow by blow. But I think that, the fact that it's doctors, yes, that is the most sympathetic group among those impacted by this. But I also think that this is, I sort of agree with Comrade Scott. Really appreciate it. Also, that was good. I liked that business community rant there, Scott. We'll get you in the club yet.
Excellent, fantastic.
But the other thing is that
I was watching Reds on the weekend. I
can see that. It's really sunk in.
Yeah. It's good. Take your pants off, Mr. Reid. I like that line.
There's hope for you yet, But look, there's no party championing this fight, right? And that's really the problem. So if this were to continue the way that we saw the other tax change around the family income splitting stuff with the doctors, like there was a champion in Parliament to carry that forward and to really hammer on that. The Conservatives have not taken the bait on that here in the same way. So I think that also limits the story. I would say, though, I think that the communications on this has been maybe not super tight also from the government side. I listened to Mark Holland's interviews over the weekend defending this. I don't think he was also very clear in how he was articulating the defense of the policy. I think that there are also ways that they could have crafted this if they wanted to exempt family doctors. This was a pretty predictable issue. So there are ways that they could have gotten around that. But the most important thing is that from the research that's come out so far, but also from previous research, we really know that people react differently to tax changes when they're linked to what you're spending it on. So there's also, I think, been maybe a lack of discipline in how they've framed the capital gains increase, because nobody knows what the fuck a capital gains increase is. And you even saw this, major news outlets, including CTV, were making mistakes in how they were communicating what this is.
A tax rate of 66 and 2/3%. Right. You see that mistake everywhere.
That's right. And so it's a type of taxation that lends itself to error, except for the top 2% of the population that knows what a capital gains is. But there is an easy way to talk about it, right? You're equalizing the tax treatment of investment income and income that people make from work, right? That's it. That's an easy way to talk about it. And you're using it. What are you doing with it? Well, you're using it to pay for your investments in housing, for your generational investments in housing. when you tie it like that, then it goes a lot further. And I think you get a lot more heads nodding. And so I think it's notable that the government didn't really carry that message through. They didn't really try to simplify the explanation of it in a way that would protect them a little bit. And then the last thing I just want to say about the doctors and this issue is that, like, look, there is absolutely an issue around how family doctors are compensated in Canada. And the reason that this is such a problem for family doctors is that years back, in lieu of fee increases, they were told to incorporate as a way to save for retirement, right? But this means that we have a problem with how we compensate doctors, not that we have a problem with our capital gains tax system, right? So, I think you can
kill the fee for service model. It's a crock of antiquated shit.
Yes. And also, you can talk absolutely about family doctors struggling to make the math in their practices. This is a known problem. You can talk about doctors being incredibly demoralized with all of the crises facing our healthcare system. And after the pandemic, these are really very real issues that have to be dealt with. But you can talk about those things without adjusting this particular tax increase that's actually, I think, quite surgical and well-targeted.
Competition. Competitive fire, compete level. It's mid-spring in Canada, Stanley Cup playoffs. Flip on any sports media, every third sentence features a variation on the word. Into that glut, I offer these observations on competition, but from an entirely different arena. And for you hurly-burlyites who pay close attention to these ads, I'll just note that's a pun inside a segue. Not shockingly, it's the world of telecom. Even less shockingly, they're from our presenting sponsor, TELUS. First, some fresh data. Because of a more competitive landscape in Ontario, which I'll come back to in about 30 seconds, internet prices there are falling, 7.2% in March, over 26% in the last 12 months. When we widen the aperture, and you might have seen this quoted in the federal budget, StatsCan reports cell phone plan rates have declined 50% since December 2018. Also from StatsCan, while overall inflation ticked up to 2.9% in March from 2.8% in February, cell phone prices continued to fall, now 26% cheaper year on year than March 2023. Back to Ontario and their falling internet prices. There's a reason for it. New entrants into the competitive landscape, like Koodo, one of TELUS's flanker brands. Pre-Koodo internet in Ontario, wireline prices were historically stable, a fancy way of saying they didn't get any cheaper. That all began to change last October. Fact is, companies like Koodo, who invest in new markets and put real skin in the game, are best equipped to offer innovative service packages and price promotions and bring sustainable competition. TELUS isn't shy about it. They've already made a difference in Ontario. They want to make a bigger difference for more customers east. Compete harder. To sum that up, I'll just borrow the perfect words of the late, very great Bob Cole, the soundtrack of so many Stanley Cup playoffs. Oh, baby. Kory, you're in the Prime Minister's office. You have a measure that you wanted to have a fight about. You do have a fight about it, but it's not with the people that you wanted to have the fight with. Do you nonetheless double down on that fight because you need a fight with somebody, or do you try to smooth those waters and walk away?
Yeah. I don't know how wise it would be to cut and run on it. Like, I think what's truer is they're not getting much engagement one way or the other. But insofar as they are, they wanted to fight with conservatives, and instead they're fighting with Mark Carney and doctors. That's not a win. That said, the public doesn't view doctors as being middle class. They view them as being something above that, in the same way as lawyers or others, and that might not be universally true in terms of what their actual income is compared to others. But in terms of their societal perception, I think they're viewed as being wealthier than they are for the most part. Just respond a little bit to some of what Jordan's saying. Like, look, I don't think there's a crisis of doctors wanting to leave the profession. There is a huge glut of people who want to become doctors, and we restrict their access to the schooling that is required to become one. I think the bigger thing is what you were pointing to, Scott, around changing the way that we compensate them over time. Sure. that makes sense. But I think the bigger thing for the public is that we need to train a lot more of them. And that's probably not good for doctor wages, just in terms of supply and demand and price and all of that. But I don't think that's a bad thing for the healthcare system either. Like, we have a shortage of family doctors. We should train more family doctors. But once again, like, this whole conversation has gone down a healthcare line. It's gone down a whole bunch of other directions other than the wedge that I think they were trying to use. So, it's it was obviously the wrong measure in terms of getting the political outcome they wanted and the debate they wanted, because we're talking about all kinds of other things other than eat the rich, which is what I think they wanted.
So there's a hanging thread here that they could grab, maybe. And I'll just throw this out to the three of you, which is, my experience is that a lot of people our age, and I'm sorry about that, Jordan. A lot of people our age,
Good enough, friends.
in our circumstances, in my circle of friends, don't know how affluent they are relative to the general population. They think they're normal. They think they're something of middle class. They don't see themselves as among the affluent of the country, even though statistically they are. So one of the things that repeatedly comes up in this discussion is second properties and cottages. Now, full disclosure, I periodically do this podcast from my second property, from my cottage. But I think there's a worry among the political class that people who own second properties are regular folks who shouldn't be caught up in this and shouldn't be used to contrast. I think that's probably wrong. I think most people living in the country who are having trouble affording their first residence don't really have a ton of sympathy for me, that I'm going to have to pay more capital gains tax on my cottage. What do you think about that?
Overwhelmingly true. That's
Hard agree.
Yeah, look, I also think that we can read too much into this. Like, I looked with interest at Bruce Anderson's polling around budget and leges, and what's the most true thing that you could say? Nothing from the budget punched through. Right. Virtually everyone didn't hear anything about it. And so, we're debating.
Actually, when you read them, the measures, they say, well, that sounds pretty good. But when you first ask them what they thought of the budget, they say it was shitty.
Yeah,
right?
Shitty. But, there's an easier comms path here for the Conservatives, which is liberals equal higher taxes and taxes equal bad. And I think that is the easy message to sell. You don't have to get into inclusion rates and all this other stuff. People are already pissed about a carbon tax, and this is another tax, and it's going up, and the liberals are pushing it up. I don't really understand it, but what's the basic math in my mind? Taxes are bad, and liberals increase taxes. And those things, I think that's kind of what it's defaulting down to. They're not getting enough fight on the specifics of it in the way that wedges people towards them, which is sort of the narrative that, like, Jordan, they should hire you to do their comms. Your description of it, far better than anything I've heard coming out of the government. So it's, I just think they're lacking the ability to explain it in a way that is simpler and more effective than taxes are bad and liberals increase taxes.
What do you think, Scott? Make me the villain?
Maybe. I'm not sure I'm not convinced that that's necessarily the fight they want either, and I'm not sure that it's going to work. I think your analysis of how people view this stuff is correct, but I don't know that they can necessarily pick that ball up and run in any direction that's going to gain them yards, actually. And I'll just make, and again, so many of my comments and interventions on this pod are basically could be summed up by saying Reid says something vaguely or specifically fatalistic yet again. But I don't even think it's what Kory says. Yes, you'll hear people in the coffee shops and bars bitching about taxes, but I think there's something even more. Like, there's an even more basic takeaway, which I don't know how you fight through this fog, which is, it's just that people go like, what do you think of the budget? And they just kind of go, I don't know. Like, it's loud and lousy. Everything seems loud and lousy right now. Like, it's just, and this is, I think, one of those perverse things that, helps Donald Trump. It helps anybody that's peddling a message of, I am the strong man. I will create order. And when you see, like, I don't want to go in hyper divisive territory, people are going to flip out. But when you see the protests that are occurring, today at McGill University, those protests are going to spread. You're going to see that protest at McGill University, the encampments there around the Palestinian issue. You're going to see them at TMU. You're going to see them at York University. You're going to see them. And there's this sort of sense of things are just out of whack. It's just loud and lousy out there. So what do I think of the budget? I don't know. It's kind of like whatever. I hear people are pissed about it. Nothing seems to be working. Everything's fucked up. And, and all of that is just such unbelievable sledding for an incumbent government. And I think it's really, 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 really challenging. This sense that things are just out of control. Nobody's got their hands around it. Certainly the government we have hasn't got their hands around it, whether it's the Democratic administration of Biden, the Conservative administration in the United Kingdom, Trudeau's government. Like that's the meta thesis. We're going through one of those periods where people are like, you know what? I'm going to elect the person who promises order. Like that's where we're at, I think.
Well, you sound so much like the Prime Minister that forces me to move to our clipping of the day.
People are always accusing me of sounding like him and looking like him also. Tall, handsome, athletic, and dangerous.
And always aware of your posture.
We're just waiting on you to do your yoga poses on camera here.
Yeah.
We'll wait. It's okay, Scott. Take time.
You're going to have to.
So next Sunday, that's May 5th, thousands of people will do a good thing and jump on their bikes or pull on their sneakers and rack up some mileage for the oncology department of the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario in Ottawa. Bless their hearts and generosity. The CN Cycle for CHEO, organized by our sponsor CN Rail, raises money for kids with cancer and their families. If there's a better cause than that, I'm not aware of it. Last year, more than 6,000 riders and walkers raised $1.8 million. It's a lot of help for families dealing with the disease. Things like radiation and surgery and chemotherapy and stem cell transplants are expensive, and we all know about the budget limitations Canadian hospitals are dealing with. Cancer treatments are brutal enough for anxious families, never mind the costs borne by parents who have to bring their kids in from out of town and want to stay by their sides during the procedures. The money that pours in from CN Cycle for CHEO sponsorships provides crucial relief. Anyway, the event has expanded terrifically in recent years. Last year's total has set a record. In the 16 years the event has been held, it has raised more than $13 million. This year, registrations are up, and so is the fundraising goal. This money makes the lives of sick children better, folks. If you live in Ottawa, consider getting out there and biking or running. If you can't, sponsor someone. It's simple to register online. The website address is cncycle.ca. Again, cncycle.ca. There's just no better way to spend your money or time. Stephanie Taylor in the Canadian press listened to Trudeau's done a bunch of podcast interviews, half an hour in length roughly. Canadian press listened to all of them and they summarized the messaging. And I think it's pretty interesting. So here I'm going to take a segment from her article, and it starts with a quote from Trudeau. When the gas price goes up by 20 cents, people say, oh, it's the carbon tax, despite it only accounting for 3 cents, Trudeau told the big story. And we actually increased the carbon rebates at the same time, he said. The context is people are looking for things to be frustrated about because they're feeling frustrated, and it's a very easy target. Right now, we're a long way from an election. It's easy for people to be frustrated about a whole bunch of different things. My choice as leader is, okay, do I bow down to that even though I think it's wrong? Said Trudeau. I think people are wrong to be worried about this. I understand why they are. Speaking to Vox, Trudeau characterized the challenge ahead in the context of a broader fight against the rise of populist and authoritarian leaders. Democracy is definitely under threat, he said. He took pains to characterize it as a ballot box question when Canadians next head to the polls. Canadians are going to have to choose over the next year and a half what kind of country we are, Trudeau said. Are we a country that believes in evidence and science? Are we a country that looks out for each other and believes that government has a role to play in making sure that people are protected, that the world works responsibly? Or, Trudeau went on, do you want to go down a path of amplifying anger, division, and fear? Government gets out of the way and lets people fend for themselves. He said, as he has said before, that he is ready for that fight. Jordan, what impact on listeners do you think these podcast interviews are having?
I don't fucking know. I have so many thoughts about this, and like none of them positive. I think he's repeating in these, and I think it's actually notable just to back up about where, so I know he's doing some Canadian shows now, but the fact that
he did a Saskatoon show. I'm going to give him a shout out. He did a podcast from Saskatoon. Yeah.
I thought it was a cute anecdote about the show, thinking it was like a spam email initially and deleting it. It was very, very cute. But yeah, so he went first to a lot of larger American audiences, and this is a pretty tried.
Although they're large Canadian audiences too, aren't they?
Some of these do have, and but these are going to be typically friendlier interviews that steer more away from news of the day, which of course would be dominated by sinking polls for the Prime Minister. They're going to allow him to talk.
Well, he did selectively choose podcasts, right?
Sure. I mean,
noted he didn't do Alex
He's
Jones.
welcome here
Alex
anytime.
How about a noted Canadian political podcast?
Yeah, I mean, we
Hasn't
can
been on the Rebel yet.
do a fifth. We can do a fifth in here, but yeah, I think that so. He can speak, theoretically in a less defensive way, in a more relaxed way. He can avoid some of the, I think, unfortunate communications habits he has when he's cornered in scrums and at press conferences. But I don't think it works because, to be honest with you, what I heard from him in these interviews was basically a longer version of the same political argument that is utterly failing to land here in Canada. And I think the elements that you chose in your clip there, David, are a really good illustration, because he's out there on the carbon tax. He's still really making an in the weeds argument. But the bigger problem is exactly in that quote. People are wrong. Like, he's out there just arguing that people are wrong and we know better. And we are doing this virtuous thing. We know better than everybody else. It's this same tone of elite knowledge looking down on people that fuels the type of populist backlash that he's quite rightly talking about in these podcasts. The core problem that we've talked about now for this government for the better part of 2 years, which is that even when they are correct, even when they do good and necessary things, it is imbued with such a tone of holier than thou sanctimony that it turns anybody off who's not already in their increasingly small camp. It pushes them away. This is not a persuasive message. This is not a message that's outreaching to people who are tired of hearing from the Prime Minister. This is preaching to the choir. And so at that level, from a political strategy perspective, I found this to be really, to be frank, I found it to be really indulgent. I think that the folks who are advising the Prime Minister on communications are not pushing him in a different direction that might reach out to some of those voters in their universe that they have lost. They're actually pushing him to deepen some of the habits that have gotten him into this position in the first place. And I'm not making a specific policy argument here around carbon tax. I'm really strictly talking about how he communicates about the things that his government has done and is doing. He is arriving at these interviews, as he has with many interviews in Canada, with a chip on his shoulder that he's not being recognized for all the good stuff that he's done, that voters are not there rewarding him for the work that his government has done. And all of that may be true. But when you are where you are in the polls, where this government is, you have to begin to look and say that maybe what we are doing and how we're talking about it is an issue. And so I think that these interviews, while they are interesting and maybe reveal a little bit about the thinking inside the PMO on these questions, I don't think they're ultimately going to move the dial. In fact, I think that they could actually be harmful for the Prime Minister.
As Canada aims to achieve a net zero emissions economy by 2050, The clean energy sector will play a vital role in electrifying more parts of the economy that currently rely on fossil fuels, such as transportation, home and water heating, and heavy industry. Today, almost 85% of Canada's electricity comes from clean sources, and to reach its climate goals, Canada will need to build on that success. Today's podcast sponsor, Bruce Power, is a nuclear generating facility in Tiverton, Ontario, that currently supplies about 30% of Ontario's electricity and is committed to helping Canada achieve its economic and climate change objectives. Recent studies suggest Canada's electricity supply will need to at least double by 2050. As this demand grows, we have to make sure supply remains affordable, reliable, and clean. Bruce Power is refurbishing its fleet to secure a reliable supply of clean electricity to at least 2064, and is investing in increasing the energy it produces from existing reactors. Investing in clean electricity means cleaner air, better health, and more jobs as we build Canada's clean energy economy. You know, Kory, I know that they're not doing any public opinion research when I read this. Like, I just know it, right? I know that they're not doing focus groups for sure. Because let me just throw this to you. There's an assumption in this article, in this podcast interview by Trudeau, that when he says to people, are we a country that looks out for each other, believes that government has a role to play in making sure that people are protected and that the world works responsibly, he assumes that everybody will agree that he's describing himself.
Right.
And when he says, or do you go down a path of amplifying anger, division, and fear, that people would assume he was talking about Poilievre. And I'm not sure either one of those things is true.
Right. Well, certainly in the last election, he wasn't exactly the bridge builder in chief, was he? Look, he's a very polarizing figure and increasingly an angry figure. And the tone in a lot of his interviews, you know, these podcasts or others that you could point to that he's done in Canada, is sanctimonious. It's chippy. It's angry. It's divisive. He's describing a world that I don't think in a frame to look at things through that I don't think he compares favorably to. You know, Jordan mentioned that he's preaching to the choir, and I think that's true. It's just that the choir is now a barbershop quartet, and it's on its way to being a jazz trio. Like
for the longest time. Whoa!
Exactly. Well, look, it is like they're really down to base levels of support, and but even when you look within those people who voted for the Liberal Party in the last election, they're not winning those people on some of these key issues like a carbon tax. Like they have lost it on that, and he wants to go back and fight on something that he is so clearly losing on and so clearly going to lose on. You know, he can't let it go, and so as a result, I think people want to let him go. Now, this characterization, that is so binary too, even if you were to accept that he's talking about Poilievre, he's basically, as he did in the last campaign, describing people as like Alex Jones super fans and angry, sort of quasi extremists. That is not, when you're dealing with an issue where 75% of the people are against you, you're talking about a lot of people, when they hear you say that, they're like, yeah, you don't get it. That's not me. And, and I used to vote for you and it's not me. And now I'm just turning you off entirely. So, he can go and tour US media outlets all day and all night. But if it's with that message, even whatever leakage, to a Canadian audience it gets, he's not doing himself any favors. Like, I think, the strategy of the media outreach, there's some merit in doing it. But, if you're on the same failing message, it's not going to take you where you want to go.
It's an odd thing too, because by the way, I'm just going to break in here and tell people a little pro tip. Nobody listens to podcasts. Like it's a tiny section of the population. You people out there listening to us right now, you're mutants. And especially if you're older than 30. So, I mean, this is like trying to convert the country 50 people at a time. Unless you get into something like Joe Rogan or something with a mass audience. But
Well, David, I think there is a benefit in trying to reach opinion leaders, which I think is probably part of what that strategy is. And that's fine, but like you got to go there with something that has some resonance. Jordan's advice on all of that, I think, is bang on. You got to meet people where they are. You can't start a conversation with an argument. You can't start a conversation with voters telling them they're wrong. You got to start with, yeah, you're right, and I understand the problems, and get their head nodding, and then you can take them, grab them by the hand and walk with them down a different path. But if you're, just gonna basically insult them and tell them that what they think is wrong and gaslight them about what the problems of the country are and who's responsible for them, then people are just going to say, go fuck yourself. I'm going elsewhere.
Scott, I think it's likely that you gave Max Veliket this idea, so defend it.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I don't like this idea. And I think you're both wrong. I don't think it's got anything to do with opinion leaders. I don't think it's got anything to do with trying to reach younger voters or the mutants who listen to our pod. I don't think it has fuck all to do with audience. I think this is all about messenger. I think this is a self-indulgent strategy. And I'm in full agreement with Jordan on this. And, the problem is the message. And it's not just what he's saying, and all the things that you guys have criticized it for. It's that on a more basic level, like you joked earlier, Herle, you said, oh, well, you sound like the prime minister. Actually, no, the prime minister sounds like me. That's the problem with this. He's doing, I'm not even kidding. He's doing analysis, this is analysis, not leadership, right? This is people wanking on I'm going to do a long form thing. And he is breaking down the issue, offering analysis. You're not an analyst. You're the guy. Okay. Like fucking Austin Matthews can't go on Spittin' Chicklets and talk about what's wrong with the Maple Leafs power play right now. He just can't. So that's thing number one. That's in specific. But I got a bigger issue. To me, I think the podcast thing is indicative of a broader sweep, that if we take a step back and just look at the last 2, 3, 4 months, like the comparison I would make is this government right now has huge episode 9 energy. And what I mean by that is that we've all become addicted to these online streaming shows. They have 10 episodes, and we all know as we binge them, we've come to expect that episode 9 is where they go for the big swings. Episode 9 is where the superheroes square off against the supervillain, or the armies clash, or you try to kill the Night King, or there's a brokenhearted breakup, or the heroic person perishes, in a tragic fashion. Like episode 9 is where they take the big swings. Okay. And look at what's been going on. And often they just throw everything, and then they clean it up in episode 10. Episode 10, they clean it up, and that's the end. Well, what's the government been doing? Okay. And this includes some swings that maybe I like, but in total, like look at it. You have a 2-week budget rollout, not done before, right? They're doing that. The prime minister's holding press conferences with caucus and cabinet ministers behind him, right? Team, screaming team visually. That's something they hadn't been doing before. Or sometimes he's in front of a camera and a microphone and he's going hard, given I'm going to fucking say it if I feel like saying it. Poilievre is flirting with Alex Jones argument. Like they're throwing everything. They are not doing the thing that we've argued for a year and a half they should do. They have robbed themselves, for whatever reason, of doing public sector and partisan advertising. But in the absence of that, they're literally throwing episode 9 with both fists, shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. Everything. They're doing everything. And now they're stretching into podcasts. Why? Well, it's a long form opportunity. The prime minister can really, get a different look. He can avoid the gotcha questions and get deep. And, people see how reflective and thoughtful he is, and they see the motivations and all that. So this is a perfect medium for him. And it allows him to micro-target. He can go after those younger, blah, 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 blah. It's all episode 9 energy. And we know what happens. What happens is episode 10. What happens is the end comes, the curtain drops, and that's the end of the show. This really feels like we are watching a bunch of episode 9 stuff as they just flail and go, yes, sir. You know what? Well, since we can't do the thing that would actually maybe possibly punch through, We're going to try every fucking other thing. Let's try a wedge with the Conservatives on taxes. Oh, got us a wedge with the doctors? Okay, whatever. All right, again, you know what, Prime Minister? We're going to do a cross-country tour. We're going to put you on Vox. We're going to do this. We're doing a podcast thing. We'll tell Susan Delacourt why that's smart. We're going to do, it's all episode 9. And maybe at the end of it, you get a second season, but it's usually like, sorry, right? We've hired Mandy Moore to be the star. And then they go, well, you know what? It's not working. So we've actually, we're shrinking it from 10 to 3 episodes. That's how this ends. This thing is, if you look at it in total, they have been running an open experimental laboratory. They're just trying everything, throwing everything at it. It's all episode 9. And I think it's going to, frankly, right now, it's more on track to be, Game of Thrones disappointing ending than Shogun Chef's Kiss.
It's no secret that Canadians pay a lot for banking. 7 out of 10 pay a monthly fee for their checking account. And the big banks charge up to $48 in non-sufficient funds fees if their balance dips too low. Thinking about moving your investments? You might think again when you find out you can pay up to $250 in transfer fees. The federal budget called out these so-called junk fees as a problem, especially for lower-income Canadians who pay more as a percentage. They've promised to cap NSF fees at $10. That's good news. But to take it a step further, provincial governments should stand up for Canadians by cutting junk fees in their jurisdiction, like those transfer fees. Our sponsor, Wealthsimple, is ahead of the curve here. They don't charge checking account fees, NSF fees, or account transfer fees. In fact, they spend millions reimbursing clients who've been charged by other financial institutions for their move. It's another way Wealthsimple is setting new standards in banking, putting more money where it belongs, in your pocket.
I know you asked the questions around here, David, but I'm curious, does anyone think in this longer form medium where you listen to him for an hour that he comes across as likable? I say no. I don't think he comes across as likable and sympathetic.
He's losing. It's 9 years in. The guy's human. Of course he's going to be chippy and defensive.
Well, unless Scott, unless
you have
one of the
research and
reasons you went into this was to be show a little bit of humility and show a little bit of regret after 8 years about things that haven't worked out so that you can have credibility on the things you need people to believe. They're still wasting their time trying to convince people of things they'll never believe.
Arguments harder. He's going and he's making these same failed arguments just in a longer forum. Right. So that's the core sin here, is that there's no shift in their communication strategy. It's the same failed stuff at greater length. And I think it just makes it worse. And perhaps even worse is that there was some thought internally or some argument to him that this is going to move the needle or that this is helpful in some way. And I'm sorry, but that's bad advice.
Yeah. David, your point is so important. And I just, as a matter of craft, this should be rooted in a comprehensive, sweeping research effort where you say, guys, we are 4 runs behind in the bottom of the fucking 9th inning here. So let's go out and survey and see what we could do, what might work, what won't work, instead of just doing this. Because as you say, it is plainly obvious that this is not research inspired. This is not tailored to capture an audience. This is what people sitting around spitballing say, this is the Venn diagram between what I think, what we haven't tried, and what the boss will want. And gets you fucking nowhere.
Scott, I'm sure there has been some research that's gone on, but I can tell you from all the research that I've been around, the obvious answer is you step down. That's why they're not interested in doing a lot more research.
But that's why they're doing episode 9. They're doing episode 9 to avoid episode 10, right? They're looking for something.
There is no gas left in your tank as a leader because too many people have shut their ears to you. And you can't tack message because no one's even going to hear it because they have just turned you off.
So you might resign in that circumstance. And that takes us to our next point. But just really quickly, Kory, surely to God, no. I don't understand. In the absence of resignation, You need to reboot this thing. And you don't
Sure.
reboot it by saying the same thing louder and more extensively. I mean, they should have been finding out through research, what will people still believe us when we say? And maybe some of that has to be about us, that we say things that people believe so that we can get the permission to talk to them about some other stuff.
Well, I know it doesn't work in my house when I try it, but maybe others can. Yeah, like,
All right.
but yeah, it's just saying something louder, and
But
yeah,
I
think
agree with what you're saying.
Call my family
agreement.
together.
There is
Folks,
I'm
maybe stepping down as
small
dad on June
step
1st.
before that.
I want to provide the family with enough time to select a new dad in an ordered and successful transition.
One member, one vote. That would be interesting.
No, we're going to have a delegated convention. I want a new dad to emerge after some excitement and drama.
Yeah. But sorry, I think just to wrap that, David, on your point, there is a step before that, which is to say that we have not done some things well and we are going to do them differently. And it stuns me. I actually don't think they're throwing everything at the wall, because they have not thrown this at the wall. They have not tried that. And that is the next most obvious thing. And so that's,
I'm going to go out on a limb, Jordan. I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to say that somewhere in that government, somebody suggested what we are suggesting. And I don't think the prime minister does that.
I agree. Mm-hmm. I agree. I think that's the only plausible explanation.
Yeah.
Well, what's the point of doing more research if that's what the conclusion is? So,
Yep.
To arm yourself with an argument. Sorry, boss, you're wrong.
So that takes us directly into our last topic for the day, which is, for some reason, because, Scott and I have been saying on this show for years, there is no pressure on Trudeau. Trudeau will determine his own timing. The party is completely copacetic with Trudeau. But I think that's still largely true. But the lid has certainly come off leadership speculation, and all four of us have noticed it in our respective quarters, that every Liberal is talking quite openly about this. And for every article I read about how Trudeau's got his caucus fully in line, I talk to many, many Liberals who are speculating that he will be gone by this summer. And that seems to be the preferred timing for people that talk to me. Surely he will leave this summer. One of the things I would like to explore with you, because I don't know the answer, I don't know if any of you do, is how fixed the fixed election date is and what impact it might have on the fixed election date if Trudeau were to resign in the summer or early fall of 2025, not 2024. But in any event, Scott, let's start with you. What does this say about the internal mindset of the party and Mr. Trudeau's position that pretty much everybody's now talking openly about this?
It says two things. One is they're having the same conversation we are, and they're coming roughly to the same conclusion Kory is, which is probably, almost inevitably, this thing ends with him walking away. They know the other option is that he doesn't walk away and that they go into battle and they just get, crispendade. But that's thing number one. Thing number two is there still is no. You and I are still correct insofar as there's no culture within this caucus, within this party, within this institution for upheaval, right? So people are almost openly now musing about, well, if he goes, and they don't regard it as disrespectful, I don't think, maybe it's still a bit furtive over beer kind of thing, but people aren't they're not plotting. So it's just well, if he goes, who are you going to, are you with Jolie? What about Champagne? What do you think about that? Who are there anybody, what about Dark Horse? What about Carney? I saw Carney was at a conference. No. That was the second last conference. He's at a new conference now. I think he's going to a conference tomorrow. And so, you get all that conversation. But one thing that's obvious about all that, and I think is interesting, is that none of it, and I'm not advocating for upheaval or civil unrest within the party, but none of it means that any of these candidates are fundamentally going to be charged with change. They haven't figured out how to talk about change. They haven't figured out, if you're going to renew yourself as a party, you have to talk about taking a different direction. And, that means somebody's going to have to try to emerge as voices of change. But that, this feels like the party wants to have a transition a la the Ontario Tories with sort of Leslie Frost, John Robarts, Bill Davis, where they just want it to be like kind of a handoff within the party, and then the next person brings a new energy and renews their mandate. And, but the true lesson of history, and particularly recent history, is you end up having to run against yourself. You end up having to, if you're not the vehicle of change, you'll be the victim of it. And none of that is on the table. None of that is inherent to any of these discussions that are happening, even furtively in whispers over beers. And that's for obvious reasons. It feels like it's uncomfortable, disloyal. And the party hasn't figured out psychologically how to talk about bouncing off itself. Like, it still has an impulse to defend every choice it's made, every decision that it's taking, every position that it holds. And that's going to be the interesting to watch, is that if he does step down, who and how do they begin a dialogue of change?
So, that the problem is that when you change leaders, the new leader has to represent change. They have to represent to the public something sharply different that they're prepared to take a look at after not having looked at it. But the people who vote in a leadership race are the partisans, who are generally still in favor of the government's agenda. Right? So they're actually a conservative force on that change dynamic and can force leadership campaigns into sounding more the same than different. Because inside the party, you kind of got to run to where the zeitgeist is.
Sure. But you can see times where this has worked for parties. Like, I don't think it's an impossible challenge to do. Look, I don't think that there is a Martin Chrétien style campaign afoot by any of these candidates to push Trudeau out. But what I feel, and I don't have the same level of insight into the Liberal Party that you guys do, but it feels like a Trudeau resignation is a very, very real possibility, and a much greater possibility than it was even a few months ago. And I think if you don't see numbers changing by the end of the summer, I think you see Trudeau leaving. And then you get to what I think that one of the more interesting parts of the conversation is what happens with the coalition agreement, what happens with the fixed election date. All of those things then start moving in interesting ways. I don't think there's any way, if he leaves this fall, that you don't push past the fixed election date by at least a few months, if not 6. Like, I think, the time that it takes to spin up a leadership race, I think you want that leadership race not to be a coronation, and a fast race tends to be more of a coronation. I think you want to have at least 6 months there to have people campaign. There's a pretty robust number of applicants for that job right now. If Carney is obviously out staking some ground out. I don't think the Dom LeBlanc speculation was an accident or unsanctioned. You've got Sean Fraser, you've got Champagne, you've got Jolie, maybe Anita Anand. There's a pretty healthy list of people who expressed some interest in running, or people have expressed some interest in having them run. And I think you want to let that develop. I agree that there has to be some differentiation. I think you saw Mark Carney doing that. As we talked about earlier, one of the people who's been critical of the capital gains measures is Carney. And, that's coming from, not within the caucus, but, within the potential leadership.
Also criticized the Volkswagen investment, by the way, the other night when I heard something.
Yeah. So, but these are differentiations for sure. But I think whoever comes in, the big differentiation is going to be that they abandon the carbon tax, and I think that's almost a certainty, no matter who wins.
There's not a lot of point to taking the prize if you don't do that.
Yeah.
I was just admiring Kory's art and landing that. Like, ooh, that's good. Like, right back. Haven't talked about it. I love it.
I know, before Jordan weighs in, can I just, because I'm curious to get a reaction to this. If the government tries to push out its natural life, boy, oh boy, does it put Singh as Johnny on the spot. Because why would you extend your arrangement with a new prime minister under a different set of terms? How is it in it's not in your self-interest to go into an election and get monstered, but it's not in your self-interest to be seen in the last steps toward an inevitable election to be willing to like, I'll sign up with any old liberal. Like, so like, I mean, it's boy, oh boy, it puts you really in a tight corner.
On the other hand, it's a weird argument to say, Scott, the Liberals pick a new leader who presumably, for the sake of argument, at least temporarily is more popular than Trudeau, for saying to say, well, I was fine with Trudeau. I could support Trudeau, but this guy or this girl, I have no truck or trade with them.
I think you guys are looking at it in the wrong way, or at least I'm going to tell you how New Democrats are going to look at it, which is differently than that. I do think this does really interesting things for the confidence and supply agreement. But I think that the way New Democrats are likely going to look at it is another opportunity to squeeze more out of the Liberals. This is a moment of massive peril for the Liberal government. In fact, I would argue of maximum peril. If you have a scenario, and let's even take like the most generous timeline. Okay, let's say the Prime Minister takes his leave at the end of the summer. Okay, that's even, I think, faster than many would think if he does make that decision. And let's say that there's a quick leadership race, which I think that there are those who will argue strongly for that. Certainly, the buzz around Carney has all the hallmarks of a wannabe frontrunner campaign. And so I think there'll be a push for that. Although I do agree with Kory. There's a lot of strong contenders. So were I of the red team persuasion, I'd be looking for sure for a longer leadership race. But there's no guarantee that a new leader coming in for the Liberals is going to like the confidence and supply agreement. In fact, I would venture to say that in the leadership race, that will be an important question. Would you continue the confidence and supply agreement? And going back to our original discussion about differentiation, I'm willing to bet that most of them are going to need to say no. And so right away, you have a scenario where the agreement is already in peril through this leadership race because it itself will become an object of debate within the leadership race. So if there's a new leader who comes in and suddenly wants to strike another agreement, well, number one, that may not be something that they are able to do because perhaps they were out arguing against it. And number two, now it's a fresh table for Singh. He can ask for anything. Because the only thing worse than going to an election under Justin Trudeau would be going to an election too early under a new leader. Going to an election not at a time and place of the Liberals choosing, but at a time and place of the NDP's choosing. Now, is it true that would be very damaging for the NDP? Yeah, they're not looking great right now. But I would also make an argument that there would be those who would say, either we get more out of this government, we get more stuff, we get more hard agreement on things that we want, or if we're going, we're taking them down with us. And they make the play, they make the calculation that a drastically weakened Liberal government with a new unknown leader is a more vulnerable prey for them to try to surpass in an election campaign. And to circle back to where we started with Mark Carney, I think that there are a lot of New Democrats. They don't have the popcorn out yet because this is not yet the Liberal leadership rivalries that we know and love. And I don't want to cast it that way. But the fact that there is such maybe a growing interest around a two-term central banker with completely unproven retail politics skills is music to their ears. And somebody whose idea of differentiation and I do think everyone should listen to that Canada 2020 speech, which was so very carefully crafted, is around things like arguing against the capital gains tax, arguing greater productivity investments and things like that are frankly really going to resonate in a very warm room of Canada 2020 and not so far outside that. So I think that there are some very interesting elements here for New Democrats, and I think that they're going to be watching this very, very carefully, and that we could be entering into an expect the unexpected era of federal politics.
Well,
it's really important, Kory.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you.
Well, I was just going to say Carney's speech and the topics he chose to focus on would indicate that he's not doing any polling or focus testing either. But
yeah, there's some of that. I was gonna make the point that the timing of Trudeau's departure and the timing of the next election are really important to this because there is no known quantity to Canadians. There is nobody that anybody knows or feels comfortable with. And so the odds are, and by the way, there's nobody who's really ready to step into a writ period and perform, which is one of the reasons why Liberals have been so nervous about giving up Trudeau, because even as he's not saying the right things, we can watch that he can do it, right?
No, he's a proven campaigner. There's no question there.
Right. So giving people time, like I'll just go from personal experience. I had this conversation with Kathleen Wynne last week. We were agreeing if she had to go right into a writ after winning the leadership, she likely would have lost. It was that year that she had to bring in a budget, run some advertising, introduce herself, get people to know her and be comfortable with. It was absolutely critical. And I think it would be absolutely critical for anybody taking over from Trudeau.
Well, but I think there's some indications that that's not necessarily true. Like, and none of these examples fit perfectly. And I know you'll point out the obvious differences, but Campbell went almost immediately into a campaign. It was a few months later, and while she got absolutely fucking trounced, she did start the campaign at 43. And it was a disastrously managed and run campaign, one for the ages, but started it with a substantial lead after a short period as time as prime minister in a situation that's very similar. I'd also point to, I think we had like 6 weeks between Ford winning the leadership and going to the polls, probably helpful in that case, but the setup in the leadership race is, I think, actually what's important. That's where you demonstrate you can campaign. That's where you flesh out what your agenda is going to be, and you have to do that well, I think, if you want to have that happen. But I don't think it's impossible. But any way you cut it, it's the Liberals are in a very difficult position. But at a certain point, it's going to look better than the status quo, and I think it's there now, to be honest.
Let's play a quick game. Let's go around the table and each say, what are the top 3 names you're hearing? What are the top 3 names you're hearing to replace Trudeau? Scott?
Julie, Dom, and Carney, with Dom being obviously a recent entry and one that excites people because they do imagine him in front of a microphone able to campaign like a campaigner.
Okay. Jordan, what's your circle talk? Who's your circle talking about?
Yeah, I'd say the exact 3 with actually Anand coming up as like a close 4th. There's certainly a lot of New Dems and New Dem adjacent Liberals who like her.
Kory?
Carney, LeBlanc, and Fraser.
Yeah,
Fraser's interesting because he's such a capable communicator and performer.
Well,
and no dummy either. Like
he comes up frequently. He comes up frequently with me, as does Champagne. To be honest, a lot of people are still in the world of, isn't Champagne good at retail politics? Isn't Champagne good at politics? And then Carney. You don't hear Freeland's name.
No, ever.
I don't think there's a sense that she's interested anymore.
Well, I don't
agree with that. I don't agree with that. I hear from people that she is interested in it. Not anybody that's close to her. Like, I'm not hearing, like, it's not like Bevan is telling me that, just to be really explicit, right? So I just don't want to leave people with a misimpression. But I hear people saying that, their communications with her, their conversations with her suggest that maybe, she might be preserving the idea. But I think the last year and a half has been a really handicapping in terms of people's confidence in her political skills.
Well, it's tough. If you're carrying that water as finance minister, it's a difficult move.
Fraser's having a bit of a moment now. And like the context that I hear brought up is like, he's actually taking the fight to Poilievre, and he's, showing some signs of life in ways that I think people are frustrated that the government as a whole is not. So, I think that's, that may be fleeting, but I think he's having a moment right now.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, I'd agree.
All right, Gordon Pinsent, bring it home.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
That, by the way, is a Pierre Poilievre slogan, isn't it?
Bring it home.
Yeah.
What are we bringing?
I
Is it a
understood
picnic?
that.
Is it bacon? I don't know. What's happening?
Like, Fry it up in the pan.
Nonetheless, he's fucking changed our vocabulary so much that I'm using his goddamn slogans in the show inadvertently, for fuck's sake.
Well, in fairness, I'm not sure he invented that one, but I have heard it before.
Well, maybe I should go first.
All right, you go.
Because we didn't have time today to talk about his little pit stop, so of course I'm gonna scoop that up as my hey you, and this is a hey you out to his team because as we here particularly all know, they are very smart and very strategic, and wow, this was not. And so my hey you is going out for this really poorly chosen, let's say, stop at this. And in air quotes, anti-carbon tax encampment on the New Brunswick-Nova Scotia border that Poilievre made earlier this week. Look, these folks are crazy, okay, guys? They are absolutely, and I'm not talking about Kory because I see your eyebrows going up. I'm not saying that people who oppose the carbon tax are crazy, to be clear. I'm talking about people who are camping out and talking about getting a porta potty on the back of a flatbed truck because otherwise they're peeing on lawns, okay? And they're living there, okay? Because they think that somehow living in this encampment is going to get rid of the carbon tax.
Where are they pooping?
Yes. Well, Poilievre got
wherever they fucking feel like it, David. Freedom!
Guys, he got to have a conversation with them about this because he made a bad choice to get out and talk to them. And look, I can only conclude that this was a choice that he made because I don't think this is a choice that the team around him would have encouraged because it meant that they were talking about this last week and not about the carbon tax on the post-budget week. They were talking about why he was engaging with this group that had this diagolon symbol that is a fellow traveler to very troubling groups. And I know that we are going to hear from Kory that they are representative of people who oppose the carbon tax, and that's well and good for him to make that argument. But I think that he would also agree that it is bad strategy for the Conservatives to hang out with these folks and to legitimize these things. And it's also bad for the country. So that's my hey you this week, because I think that it is, and Althea Raj said this, I think that he is too comfortable if he thinks that this is the type of thing that he can afford to do. So my hey you this week is to just stay in the car, drive past, go. When you see these people, don't stop. Don't engage.
Scott?
My hey you is to David Eby. And this is something that our pals at Hotel Pacifico should really speak of with expertise as opposed to me and my big fat Central Canadian lenses over my eyes. But I think that Eby coming out so forcefully and saying that the federal government basically needs to save his wagon on drug decrim and that this experiment has not worked, I think it's almost the surest objective evidence we have that some of the speculation we three, not our pals at Hotel Pacifico, but about a month and a half ago, the three of us were all speculating on how this world unfolds out there and what the implications of a BC United collapse might be and where was the Conservative Party out there headed and how potent might it be. I think Eby has no choice with the crime issues on his ass and with the broader implications of BC United, meaning there'll be no divided right. He has no choice but to do this and to, I think, quite transparently and a bit cloyingly try to blame it on the federal government or ask the federal government to pick up a share of this mess. And I have complicated views on the issue and the policy. I'll set those aside for now. I'm just saying, I think this is a tell. I think it's a big tell. And I'm just not willing to dismiss out of hand that the Conservative Party in BC could be rolling like thunder and watch out because I see Eby's move as an indication that he at least is alarmed.
Scott, this is fucking Poilievre. This is fucking
Yes.
Poilievre, right? Eby doesn't face any serious opposition in British Columbia, which is why we thought he was safe. His premiership is being challenged by Pierre Poilievre.
That's right. And the BC Conservatives are the beneficiary of that. They are the receptacle, and now they become the vehicle of it. They will probably, because of inexperience and lack of skills, find a way to fuck it up. But that's not a guarantee. Like I just watch that space. That to me looks very combustible, very dangerous, and I think that EB obviously recognizes that.
Well, it's only one poll so far, but Main Street has EB in second for the first time. First poll to show that, I believe. We'll see what happens. But if other polls come out showing the same, like they're going to be in real trouble. And
IVR overestimates older respondents, underestimates younger respondents, but that doesn't change the complexion. It's so close, obviously. It may not be exactly the way, but it's close. Yeah, Kory, what's your hey you?
Well, mine is going out to Jason Kenney. I thought that his appearance on the Herle Burley, what was a couple months ago, was excellent. It was just before Christmas, I think. And I heard him again on Paul Wells's podcast, about a week or so ago. I think Jason has always been one of the most articulate and thoughtful people in the Conservative movement. But when you move over to elected politics and you're leading a party or a senior minister, you've got to really nerf some of the things you're saying and stick within the boundaries of what your role is restricting you to do. But I think we need to hear a lot more of Jason Kenney and other folks like him, and not the particulars of what his positions are on things necessarily, but a really thoughtful, articulate presentation of conservatism. And with some thoughtfulness around one's own record, but also the movement as a whole. So, hey, Jason, I love hearing you out there talking, and I hope to hear a lot more from you. You're doing great.
Here, agree with that. She's going to be the co-chair with Kathleen Wynne of the Politics of the Pen dinner.
Yeah,
I will be there.
So he's having a big coming out in official Ottawa for the new Jason Kenney. The post Alberta Jason Kenney.
It's the more relaxed Jason Kenney.
That's right.
He's got the second best laugh in politics after you, David. I think when David laughs, he feels you feel our podcast, and when Jason does, he feels whatever forum he's into. He's got a great laugh.
My hey you goes out to Jonathan Wilkinson and Chrystia Freeland. It's a small little one, but I love the way you've handled this thing in Saskatchewan and ensuring that Saskatchewan residents get the full rebate from the carbon tax, even though the government's not remitting contributions from home heating, and they're leaving Minister Duncan out there to deal with the Canada Revenue Agency head-to-head. And so good luck to him. And good luck to him. And the Liberals have taken the politics out of it. I know it doesn't matter. It's Saskatchewan. It's whatever. But it was smoothly done. So, hey, you. Well done. All right. That's our show for this week. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, as well as our sponsors, CN, Bruce Power, and Wealth Simple. Scott, Jordan, and Kory, thanks for being here this week. Always fun to hang out. Scott, you're not with us next week?
I'm away.
You're away, so it's the two of us, Jordan and Kory.
There you go.
Young minds,
Represent.
Don't worry, Scott. I'll speak on your behalf.
Excellent. We all will. All will. Until then, take care of yourselves, you accursed.